that the signal has been
to
paused.
reconnect.
But I was just asked a question by Rebecca on choice. I believe, and I know this to be true, that even though people will not admit it, but all behavior is chosen. So therefore, if I ask you, when was the last time someone made you angry? And you would think of somebody and something they did. And I would then ask you, did they make you angry? Or did you choose to be angry about what they said or did? Nah.
Get used to
And
it.
they say,
So you're saying the feeling is a choice
Yes, ma'am.
because you're adjusting your expectation, or
We all have expectations of something or somebody. And because of that expectation, we will then give it a value. High expectation, low expectation, no expectation.
Okay.
Based on that, then we're going to make a decision. If the person does what I want them to do, then I'm going to be very, very happy about that. Because I had a high expectation, they fulfilled it. If I have a high expectation of them and they don't do what I wanted them to do or thought they should do, then I'm going to have, my feeling level is going to drop. I've attached an emotional level to that, which is, I'm going to be disappointed. I'm going to be angry. I am going to choose to be angry or disappointed because that person didn't do what I wanted them to do. They didn't say what I wanted them to say. I'm going to choose to react to their behavior.
Okay, that's what I'm used to. What's new for me is hearing the choice to have the emotion. Like, I understand the choice and the reaction, but what's new for me, I'm processing is the choice to feel a certain way about it. So that's why I'm so.
The choice is, we will be angry anyway. And I'm not saying don't be angry. And when I say that, I always reference Jesus. He chose to be angry. He chose to turn those tables over. He chose to open up a can of whoop.
Okay, yes.
But it was for a reason. He made a choice. He needed to do that. But he didn't stay angry. That's the point, is you can be angry. But if you know the reason why, then that's a choice.
Okay, so are you saying that if you don't know the reason why, like if you're not conscious of it, then technically that's not a choice?
You should be conscious of yourself.
Okay.
Because you can't control other people.
Right.
You can't make anybody do anything unless they're in jail or at the point of death or harm. But what people choose to do is their choice. How we choose to accept that and react to it is our choice. Now, I will go back to some of the teachers that handle special needs children. Sometimes they choose to have an attitude based on not having relief or help or understanding. And that you have sometimes brings you into that sphere of judgment, right? And then at that time, we are predisposed with disappointment because my expectations of you is to act this way. So I'm going to choose to be disappointed in you before I even talk to you.
Oh, so you're saying disappointment is more like linked to judgment?
It is linked to judgment. It is linked to fear. It is linked to getting what we want. It is linked to our subconscious. Because just think about all of the things you wanted when you were a child that you didn't get, that you chose to be disappointed about. Some of those things were things that we had no control over. If we were violated as a child, we would be disappointed that we couldn't say something or fight back or tell our parents, because maybe we were told that if you tell somebody, I'll hurt you. That can cause some deep, deep resentment, disappointment, the feeling of vulnerability that I'm not protected. And you ladies can tell me of the relationships that you've gone into over your lifetime. Were you safe in that? What were you looking for? Did you base your judgments and decisions on what you had experienced in past family life? Relationships with teachers, friends, all of those good things. One of mine was with one of my best friends. He was my best friend. I was closer to him than I was my brother. And he disappointed me. To the point what he did was, he stood up for his cousin who was dating the same woman that I was dating. But he chose to be the defender of this guy, his cousin. But I was friends with the brothers of this guy, and the brothers they didn't care about that. They weren't worried about that. But the disappointment was he was going to choose to defend the honor of his cousin, so much so that we got into a fight. And that fight led to my almost killing him. But he hit me with a pool stick that never stopped me when I came after him. But after that, that disappointment ended that relationship. The relationship that was stronger with him than it was with my brother that was right under me. So we do have these situations in life that causes us to be disappointed. And that disappointment went on for years, and I saw him a couple of years ago. And I was no longer angry. But those are the kind of things that affect us, because then we have to choose. And we have to also understand that, as Larry pointed out earlier, people have character flaws. People have flaws. We all do.
No one's going through.
And what we don't choose to realize until later in a committed relationship, that person is flawed. That person, now we're pointing at the other person because we feel that their choices that they're choosing to make are flawed, and we're going to be disappointed about it. But we don't count the times that we have disappointed them.
There's a proverbial saying, you point one finger and three more point back.
Right.
Once you recognize that, I can't be a judge of anyone before I judge myself, then you find yourself in a very precarious position.
What does the Bible say about the speck in your eye? We were talking about speck in somebody else's, and then we have a log in ours. Make sense? Want to say hello, Derek? Hey, Derek.
Hey, Derek.
Hello, Sharon.
Still says?
Uh,
Yeah, they can still see.
I'm hoping so,
Good, good.
because the recording just is trying to reconnect. But Derek, tell us if you can still hear us. Gloria said she could earlier. She could still see us and hear us. So we have continued to have this discussion. Maybe we're having it with ourselves, but it's still a discussion.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. All therapy is good therapy.
So, you made some notes on.
I did,
Okay.
I did.
Tell us about your notes.
Because I had no idea, what it was gonna go. But I end up, one thing that you said is, what is the context? So, as a teacher and for me, a lot of times, in my personal relationships, dealing with young, small children I have, they want to know what to do. Like, how do you deal with the level? Because they want somebody to pay, right?
Yes, yes.
They want someone to pay for what's been done to them. So, or they want to know whether or not to continue this relationship. So, for myself, when I was thinking about the roots of disappointment, I was thinking about the context, and you mentioned character. I thought of experience, I thought of ignorance, I thought of culture, and the incident. So based on the level of disappointment, it would let me know how to engage, or how to tell them to engage the person. I don't want to say to minimize damage per se, but for personal assessment, because I don't know, me and my sister were having this conversation, I'm gonna jump just a little bit, and we were talking about Black American women for a minute. And we were talking about, in our younger years, what type of relationships did we have? And we talked about how, in hindsight, some of those should have ended sooner. Some of those we let go a little too long, hoping the other person would change, or the failure for us to recognize our own contribution.
Right.
So I love this because we're talking about relationship with ourselves and others, which is basically what the whole book of the Bible is about.
Right.
So that's how I made the context. One thing in my life that was very confusing for me was what was appropriate versus inappropriate. When to stay, when to leave. When is it abuse versus a mistake? Like, those are the things that really rattled my mind. I didn't know what to do. Because I came from a family that did not recognize emotions. And I now know that if you don't recognize emotions, then you can't help but abuse them. So with that, in my teaching in my personal life, I'm always looking for context. If a person, let's say, I guess it could be anything. If a person does anything and you have a relationship with them and you tell them that it hurts you for whatever reason, perhaps they do it again, and you have the conversation, perhaps it was a mistake, but by the third time, I'm in my 40s now, so is this a pattern behavior? Is this a character flaw with you? Or is it a character flaw? Maybe they just don't care, maybe the investment is not what you thought it was, but those type of things, right? When I am disappointed, what do I now do? So that's the level that I've been, especially teaching small children.
Well, part of the context, as you pointed out, is to go back further, because you were mentioning when somebody does something and you tell them about it and they do it again, and they do it again, and you're disappointed, and you have to then decide, do I stay or do I go? From my point of view, when I get those clients in here and I talk to them, it's finding out why they choose this. What is the cause? Why is it that you're choosing consciously not to do a certain thing, or to continue to do a certain thing? And inevitably, it goes back to that period of learning from the age of 3 to 8, where we were most influenced by the things that happened to us, because basically that's when our memory started. Some people can remember further back than that, but I remember some of the times that I was growing up, that what I was disappointed about, and what I became selfish about, and then what I became angry about. Because as a child, I was an angry young man. Because I always felt when we played Cowboys and Indians, I should be the chief, or I should be the leader. And when folks wouldn't follow, I'd get mad. But why? Because I consider myself a docile young man. But when we were playing those games, then I always thought that I should be the leader. Now, I've grown up thinking that I should be leader. And you could see that's a character flaw. But that character flaw was caused by something. Because my dad was a leader. He led. I expected folks to follow me like they followed him. He expected me to follow him the way he wanted me to follow him. But there were times I could not. And his disappointment because I could, like math, terrible with math. But my father was a mathematician, and he expected me to get it, and I couldn't. And that disappointed him, and his answer was to raise his voice. Have you ever tried to beat a lesson into somebody?
Doesn't work.
Doesn't work. So that can cause resentment. And you can take that resentment from childhood up to your adulthood into your intimate, committed relationships. And I say committed relationships, if you have good friends, close friends, that's kind of a committed relationship. It's not the same as marriage, but you do want the same kind of trust and honesty from your good friends, friends you trust, friends you should trust. You want that same thing from your family, mom, dad, sister, brother. And that affects us. It affects the closeness of family. Like the brother that's right under me. For a long time, we weren't that close. We weren't that close because he had an anger issue. I had an anger issue. More than likely, it was from our father. He was tougher than I was. He was meaner than I was. And my father expected him to be the one that would be on the football team first, or do first, because of my nature. But I was bound and determined that I was going to prove to my father that I would make the football team. And I did. My brother quit. But later on he came back. But I had to prove, I had to go against his disappointment. Because I never wanted him to be disappointed in me. But we take that into our personal relationships. So much so that we will choose not to tell people what actually happened to us in our lifetime, in our early life. We bring that baggage with us. You hear about the term closet. We keep a lot in the closet. And we know, because you said this, you stay in relationships too long because there's something in their closet that keeps them repeating this same thing, doing this same thing. And it's something in our closet that makes us stay too long. That's true. Think that we can change people. Oh, they'll change. I'll just love them out of it. And we usually end up being the most disappointed because we get angry. And we don't tell people that we're angry. We can't tell our mom that homeboy is messing up. homegirl is messing up. Shame. Fear of what they said initially is you should not be dealing with that person.
I told you so.
I told you so.
No one want to hear that in their lives. I told you so.
So that's my long speech. I'm glad y'all stayed for that.
Had something they said.
Nicole, Tiffany, Nicole, Miss Vegas.
Oh, hey.
Hi, Tiffany.
Hi, family. Can't wait to hear the replay. We can't wait for you to hear it too. So she's a little late. She was going to try to be here, but she couldn't. Larry, you have something you want to add?
No, I think he said quite a bit, and to the point, to amplify that, and we talked about relationships, we talked about a few things. I like the cheat sheet you've given us, and not just looking at page 4, not skipping to it real quickly, but in the first paragraph, it says, as long as love is more important than disappointment, you can work out just about any problem between you. It is only when disappointment seems more important than love that the relationship problem becomes toxic. And based on the too long, the too shorts and things, it becomes toxic. Anything that becomes toxic in our system, we normally reject. And that's when we decide it's time to move on. And that toxic relationship, that toxic environment is where you have to move on, or what the toxic do, it kills.
So what I heard you say was,
I'm glad you put that in there.
I think what happens when we are ready to leave and the other person is not ready for us to leave.
That's really toxic.
You got something
But you got that one in there. Elaborate, please.
Because there is trauma at that point, which we see folks end up being battered or killed.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, I'm waiting on you.
Okay, well, in one of my devotions, I'm very visual. And God has to do very clearly for me to get it. And in teaching my children, they didn't understand sharing. They didn't understand sharing. And I said, everything in the universe shares. The water has to share with the clouds, with the land. The trees have to give us oxygen. The car has to share the gas. Everything shares. We were going through this lesson. And I realized that everything is cycle. There's a cycle to everything. There's a constant in and out motion, whether it's our bodies, right? The fluids in our bodies, the oxygen in the air, it has to cycle. And what I realized about trauma is that we get stuck. Like I had a really hard time understanding in my early adult life what forgiveness was. I thought that meant everything had to be okay. But now at least in my understand, I've heard this monk call emotions, energies in motion. And I love that term because I realized that emotion, feelings are things. And you have to do something with them. They can't just stay, they can't be dismissed, they can't be buried. You have to process that thing. And at first I thought, well, the other person has to acknowledge your hurt for you to actually process it, but then you'll be stuck forever.
Yes.
So, it's resentment and all this other stuff. So it's taken me personally a long time to learn how to recycle my own feelings, to forgive it. Literally, you have to fork it over.
Yeah.
You have to fork it over. You have to process that thing and work through that thing. And without that, it becomes stuck. You become ill.
Absolutely.
You get sick. It manifests in other relationships. But it has to go somewhere. That anger either eats me alive through depression, which manifests in my body is visceral pains and inflammation, or I can work out, I can meditate, I can talk to God, I can do yoga, right? There's something I have to do with it. I can do therapy, but there's something I have to do with it. I can throw a chair that doesn't, all the positive and negative coping mechanisms, right? But we have to resolve it. I realize all accounts must be reconciled, right? That's the fluids in my body to the emotions in my soul. They all have to be reconciled. There has to be a place for everything. So once I realized that, I realized in a state of trauma, there's a chink in the chain. There's something that's stuck. It's not being recycled. And anything in our system that's backed up wreaks havoc in our brains, in our minds, in our physicality. It's got to be processed. And so for trauma, I put that you can experience the fruits of the spirit. However, when that trigger manifests, that's when you get stuck. And I put that it depends on the person, but a lot of times I have some friends that say when they feel something, they may just dismiss it, or they may just bear it, or think about something else, or they may even, I hate to say this, but use prayer as an escape, not prayer to, like I'll pray it away versus dealing with the issue. So within that, I've learned that promotes within me an imbalance. Poor coping mechanisms, rumination of thoughts that won't go away, the pain, the anger that can turn into the bitterness, the resentment, and a sense of powerlessness. And if you have a chemical imbalance, that can be mania. It can manifest into so many different things. So the goal is to get help if you can't get help yourself.
So are you seeing a lot of our children now being traumatized to where they're acting out in school, or they're acting out at home? What do you think are the causes and effects of that?
The wonderful thing about elementary is that children, when you love them, they ultimately love you back. It's such a young age, when they figure out that you're going to listen to them and they're not going to go anywhere. Children talk. I have not met a child who it does not say what's wrong eventually. And that's one thing I need parents to understand. They come to me and say, my mama told me not to say this. But ultimately, 9 times out of 10, there's an underlying trauma. It's either the divorce, it's either the abuse, it's either a chemical imbalance because maybe someone was using some type of substance that triggered something. But they all have a story. It could be a death, someone died. They all have a story. And they don't know how to process their emotions. And many people don't know this, but school psychology and outside psychology are not the same thing. In school, the goal of the counselor is to deal with you, help you deal with those emotions enough to sit down and chair and do your work. That's the goal. Outside therapy is to get to the roots and start some sense of healing and understanding. That's not school psychology. So a lot of times, because there is trauma in the home, the child, I'm pretty sure you guys have seen this, the child will manifest the issue while the adults deny the issue. So we're trying to figure out something's wrong with my baby, but actually there's something wrong at home. And there's something wrong with you as well that needs to be healed. And the kid is a manifestation of that. And it's very painful as a parent. I know in my own experience, looking at that mirror, because at that age, the apple just does not fall far from the tree. It just doesn't.
So what age do they start acting out?
Oh,
Because I have small grandkids, I'm
Okay.
just getting on this.
kids
Trying to get ahead of the game.
Either trying to find solutions to the situation.
Kids are pretty immediate. I have not seen a kid not respond to a trauma. They just do it in different ways, and you have to know the child. A child that is very talkative and boisterous may become sullen. A child that is very sullen may become more boisterous. So some children want to eat. Some children refuse to eat. Some children refuse to go to the bathroom. Some go to the bathroom everywhere. It literally depends on the child. The children that I'm most worried about in the society are not the kids that act out, because they're actually asking for help in their own way. It's the kids who are very quiet and very compliant until they explode. Those are the kids. And the kids that I see on the news with the mass shootings, on the news reports, they always inevitably go back and say, I knew that kid had a history. These children are not hiding their traumas. It's just that someone's not paying attention. But children, one thing I love about children is they are the truth tellers. They tell the truth. They tell the truth in one way or the other. We as adults become very skilled at hiding in our coping mechanisms. Children generally don't have that. If you're watching, you're seeing a shift. You're seeing a change.
Where it starts like, and I heard you say earlier, the initiation of our conversation. It's a cycle, and it's the one that I as I understand you said, there are two. The one that or boisterous or vocal about their problem. They're really cycling it.
Yes.
And in creation, as well as scientifically, that's called an ecosystem. The ecosystem is the natural order of things being recycled and turned around and turned in and completes itself. And that's what we do. And what you just said, what I recognize is that when you go through that process, which is a process, then you tend to come out of it fairly stable and or normal, whatever it means. But without it, and if you get stuck, that's where the problem, initiates. That's where, back to our mastermind wisdom university comes in. These sessions, these therapies, these conversations, this interaction with the people you have here in our training helps to get unstuck, so that you can process the things, so you can get conscious of things. What do we always say? Change your what?
Change your thinking, change your behavior,
Change your life. And what we're here today to do is do life-changing process. And what you share with us has been very helpful.
Yes, it is.
What I really love that you have right here in this last paragraph is will almost certainly worsen. And one thing in relationships with children or spouses or whatever you want to call it, life partners, ignoring it does not make it go away. It makes it worse. Because if the person is not able to be aware of the problem, conscious enough to take steps to fix it, get the help, it does worsen. And old school wise, I used to watch my mother pray, hope things get better. I remember being in a lot of sermons in the 80s, all you need is Jesus, and that's great, and that's fine, that's a wonderful compliment. But just like Jesus made heart surgeons, he made therapies as well. And so as a community especially, we have got to take the steps to recognize when the behavior shifts, when it becomes too violent, right? In the home or self, when someone is no longer safe, when it interferes with normal joy in life, it's time to seek help. It is not going to resolve itself in a child. And if it's gotten to the point of abuse, it's not going to resolve itself unless there's external help.
My godson, Derek, says the underlying traumatic experience has significant impacts on adult behavior. He also said, however, we adults refuse to lend relevance to emotional trauma. We just think our behavior is just fine. In any case, it reveals itself in personal relationships.
And especially with children, it manifests in those children.
And they are the future generations of people that will abuse each other, hurt each other, kill each other, because they haven't found a way to deal with that experience, that trauma. And I believe, and you guys help me with this, outlets. You said it needs to come out some way, because I talked about that we keep in our subconscious anyway, and it used to be those big tapes that we had when we were working at IBM, those big machines, you could just see it. Then it became the 8-track that we just plug in. Then it became the what's the thing?
So the VHS?
Yeah, the VHS. And then the little, we could get lots of songs on this little bitty thing. And then we got the CDs, and now we can get 1,000 million songs. The receptacle that holds it may be different, but it's the same stuff. Music is music, preaching is preaching, crying is crying. How we process hurt. So I deal a lot with people going through grief. My wife was also a master, she's a master gardener as well as a master wisdom coach. And she said that one of the persons that she was dealing with, talking to, had just experienced the death of her mom. And she said to my wife, the way I'm dealing now is every now and then I'll catch myself crying for no reason. I'll just getting, and my wife said, that's good. That's good, because you're letting it out rather than holding it in. So we have to deal with that. Back on page 2, the third paragraph talks about hurting the ones we love. You guys see that?
To stop hurting.
It says to stop hurting. Yes. One of you, would y'all read that while I sit here and pretend I'm a.
First of all, I want to ask you,
In your
mature
kid-
becoming
Yeah.
adults, right?
Yes, yes,
Mhm.
yes. Angry.
What was the
yes.
question again?
Angry children becoming angry adults.
Absolutely.
They
Absolutely.
angry all through school. So is that why they put them on a lot of medication, or because they're angry? Do you think they need it and it affects them in later on in life? 'Cause
You
I
know what?
In the 80s, they put everybody on drugs. And now I see that a lot of people are still walking around as zombies because of the medicine that their parents gave them because they were angry or maybe didn't follow direction.
You know what? In school, we are not allowed, especially as educators, to promote anything. But what I usually tell my parents is, number one, you know your child. Number two, you know that your baby needs some help. I don't know what you choose to do, but you need to research and do something. I know parents that have gone on the dietary approach, right? A lot of these kids, they junk. School food, junk. Okay. No water, soda. It would be great if there was a multi-tiered outlet, some type of approach for our community, that if you did not want to do medicine, that you had some researched alternatives. Personally, as a parent, I would not want to put my child on medicine. However, if you send your child to a school and your child is beating up teachers and other students, and I mean stabbing, choking, running down the halls, hurting self and others, you must do something now. If it's not medication, you must do something now. Because what that translates into is it translates to me or someone else putting hands on your child. It turns into, in school today, especially for our black and brown boys, someone writing up a slip of paper using the word assault in elementary. It turns into a felony in middle school. So this is an emergency. We've got to do something. If you don't want to do medication, because I understand the severities and side effects of that, you still have to do something. Your child cannot act like a wild beast in society.
Do you think that they really could use a big dose of love and understanding?
Two prongs to that, two sides to that. Yes, and in the meantime. And this is why I want to say it. I've had children who I've been in the room for weeks with, where we hug them, love them, praying for them undercut, and at the same time, I'd still have to take a punch. There was still blood being drawn. You're still wearing out other human beings. It turns into a hospital situation in the school, and that's real. We're trained in restraint, in CPI. So there's still steps to where you're still traumatizing the kid to get them under control. And that's real. People don't know that there used to be, in some districts that maybe we had padded rooms. We had blankets. We had children diagnosed with real emotional disturbances. They could have mood disorders, they could be schizophrenia, they could be all types of stuff. But in those rooms where we were loving them and we were singing to them, we were also battling, right? We had to physically restrain them. Some of them were banging their heads against the walls, right? Scratches down their face. So some parents would put them on medication and it gave us a bridge to get to somewhere, right? Medicine doesn't have to be forever, it can be a bridge to get there. I had some parents who would do cold turkey on the weekend, and when they show up, start all over because medicine took time to kick in. So I don't think it has to be one approach, it could be a couple different approaches. But whatever it is, adults have to be on the same page, and the goal is to keep the child safe. So whatever is gonna keep your child safe. If your child is safer on medication for these 9 weeks until you come up with another plan, then do that, in my opinion. Because I've seen all the parents' approaches, right? We've seen the oils, we've seen, the diet, we've seen the medication, and I've seen only those things, and I've seen a combination of things. But whatever it is, the parent has to be vigilant, because in a little bit, at 10 years old, they can be arrested and shot dead. And that's happening too. And the cops are not asking, are you in special education? Do you have an emotional disturbance? Do you have a speech expressive disorder? Nobody cares. And that's legal. From 1 year old to 99, they can shoot.
Wow.
So it's an emergency. We really have to figure out what's the best way to keep our children safe.
And we also have to remember that a lot of our police officers, black and white, are targets. And they feel fear, threatened. And unfortunately, they feel more fear from a black or brown kid than they do a white kid.
And they're not trained in special needs, or they don't know the difference.
Right.
They don't know the signs. That's not part of their training.
We unfortunately, and I believe this, it's called we're trapped in tradition, where we haven't gotten to the point where therapy is commonly used.
Even the word therapy.
It has been trapped in tradition. It's been taboo. You're in therapy,
Especially in our community,
right,
yes.
in our community, and we don't understand that that's part of the solution. Thank God we have this outlet. We have other outlets that people are going to. Fortunately, the most prominent one is Ayala. She uses this, and it's been opening up the doors and the leeway or the bridge, you just said, to people saying, oh, it's okay to go and get therapy. But it's probably, something that's really needed as an alternative to a lot of our problems today. Because as I mentor, I'm, like I said, part of the NAACP Young Adults. We mentor black young men, and I often go to them, and I do this because I gotta put the suit on and everything, to give them an alternative look. But more importantly, I wake up and tell them every day, you wake up making your one bad decision, wait for being in prison. The system is already set up against you. They already have it set up waiting for you to make that one bad decision. So your decisions every day have to be yay or nay. And it has to be a direct line of doing the right thing, because the moment you do the wrong thing, the moment you react, it's over.
The system is geared to keep you in it.
Well, because it's profitable. It's because it's a profit now. It's a profit situation. So when we see this systemic problem, and then it stems from what and I already thought, when I just heard what you said a moment ago, I would assume, not in that field, that the active, involved parents see the progress a lot sooner than the inactive.
Well, I have to tell you, it really depends, and this is just the reality of it. And the school to prison pipeline, I didn't realize how good it was until I sat into it. And so special education is now includes behavior. So what I've seen some districts do, unfortunately, is if you have a kid who's acting out, the goal can be to get him eligible for emotional disturbance, right? Once he's in special ed, there may not be someone who's trained to deal with that behavior, right? And sometimes the behaviors are so severe that they end up in a program where they're in a behavior program all day long that mimics a juvenile hall.
that kind of runs like a juvenile hall with other students with severe behaviors. Now, I learned through Rakina Rome, she was a mentor of mine, and I'll have to refer to her website once I get it. But she works with the legalities of special education, and she actually has been working with some disability laws on the state. And she's been able to sue some school districts on behalf of the state, on behalf of parents, and get them reinstated to school or put them back into general education placement. Special ed shouldn't be a holding place, right? That's not where we should send people who are bad.
Right.
And unfortunately, it's been used that way and abused that way. In fact, when it comes to U.S. statistics, on the top of the list for special education are Native Americans, and like 2% down, it's African Americans. You know, I'm like, wow, they really have bad, you know, because they're a minority, right? 1 or 2% of the country, but make up 16% of all special education cases, and we're about 14%. So the disenfranchised are disenfranchised again with those labels that stick with them until they leave school. So again, being re-traumatized and re-victimized of what I've been called. But ultimately, these outlets saying that therapy is okay, telling parents there is a solution, this is not a sentence, that there are skill sets out of this to break this generational curse, if you will. And I'm old enough now, when I go into my individual education plan meetings, to now speak with the parents who say, I was in special education, now it's my child. And they remember when they were behind the corner, right? They weren't even in the classroom. And so they feel powerless again. So now we're dealing with a generation of this. So a lot of times the child can't even get the information that they need from the parents. So that's where we all come in of saying, how can we help you and how can we turn this bus around? Because this is not supposed to be a sentence. Emotional disturbance is not a genetic code, it's a circumstance. It's an environmental stimulus, right, causing these behaviors. So, but it's not treated as such. It's treated as there's something wrong with their brain. There's something wrong with their brain.
And that's easier to pin that label on someone and push it aside than it is to find solutions, open up and deal with it.
Well, you think back in the history of our own race, when our seniors 20, 30 years ago, as they got older, they were a little senile. Now they have Alzheimer's. They diagnosed it, put a label on it, and fortunately now it's being treatable or being directed because it's been recognized, but it's because it's recognized through all of the cultures. Not just one or two cultures, and that's the unfortunate aspect of it. Because as you just said, statistically, we're still the majority in that area. Once everyone is affected, then we get the attention we need.
And talking about Native Americans a little bit, because they were so traumatized, and still are. And if we had to talk about some of us, so still are.
Reparations. I'll get on time real quick.
The little symbol that I have here talks about it's an indication of the toxicity that we all have at some point in time. And we all have it at some point in time. Derek says accountability nests in mentorship and is a way forward dealing with aggressive behavior. He also says we need to recognize the systematic profits in locking up our young youth.
Say it on. It's a business.
Oh, what you said, I'm sorry, I'm gonna go back a little bit about if a parent is more involved. One thing I wanna talk about coaches is a lot of times a parent can be involved, but if they don't know the system that they're stepping into, then they have a hunch that something's wrong, but they don't know how to stop it because they don't have the terms of the experience, which is where advocacy and coaching comes in. I have a lot of parents who are educated, they're aware, they know what's going on, But if you've never been in this situation before, then just like our legal system, one rings around you, right? And you're like, oh, I was told this, but it really means this, especially if there's an alternate agenda. So it's a quagmire and it needs everybody's help, but hopefully this is something that we can all help with outlets.
Right.
Outlets.
Derek also says, a quote by Dr. Martin Luther King, darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. To further that is, we've got to try to find systems, outlets that can reintroduce love in our pursuit to help people. And the awareness helps drive some of that darkness away. It helps also lift some of the hate that other people choose to have in labeling. Because a lot of times in the system, because we are not in control of it, we're not in control of the labeling. We're in control of trying to find a solution to the labeling. But we need to get more involved and find more outlets for people so that they can take advantage of the words, therapy, counseling.
That's true.
Yeah.
This is new to a whole lot of people. It's frightening to a whole lot of people.
So are there outlets out there now for those kids? Because I have a friend whose child was put into resource and they stayed in resource all the way through. And then at the end, before they graduated, they were saying that some of those kids don't even get diplomas.
Right.
And a lot of people don't know that. So she had to go and fight for her kid diploma because you kept them in resource. And at the end, they gave them a diploma, but they was like, oh, you don't get a diploma, you get a certificate. Now, why do they do that? And then they don't let you know that. You should know that in elementary, that if your kid stays in this program, then he will get a certificate
Oh,
instead of a diploma.
That.
If that.
If that. Yes. When I became a special education teacher, I learned a lot. I didn't know a lot of this when I started. I just had a hunch. I was sitting in these meetings like, what? You know? So it took a while, but yes, you were right. I don't know if anything has changed this current school year, but there's something called modified work. So when you're in special education, you have accommodations. Some children just might need something to help them read. They might need dyslexia services. They might need a timer for behavior. They might need an overlay. And some students, based on their learning disability, they might say, we need to modify the work. So in the state of Texas, there are TEKs, okay? We have our own processes and goals of learning. If a student is in 5th grade, but they are only able to conceptualize 2nd grade work, then they change the TEK. So, however, with the STAR test, no matter what, they're tested on 5th grade level. So let that wrap around your brain. Which means they're, okay? So if they're going to resource, they're supposed to be working on 2nd grade work to catch them up to 5th grade. Now the problem with that is if they're taking modified work, it used to be that the STAR test was modified. And if the STAR test was modified where you really weren't testing at grade level, so they weren't going to give you the diploma for that grade level. Since now all the tests are mainstream tests no matter what, I'm still not sure if they are receiving certificate or diploma. I know that they have done different tracks. So some students say that if they receive resource, then they can go to college, but they only qualify for junior college, not four-year university.
I was told that also.
So I've been told in some meetings, don't mention that, we don't even talk about that.
Like, need to talk.
There are some conspiracies going on, but yes, it needs to be talked about, because a lot of parents are just agreeing. It's a lot of fancy jargon, and they understand the teachers sitting there with their administrators. You want to keep your job, you want to be a team player. There's a lot of different pressures going on.
Yes.
So yes, one of the outlets, I guess, that if we have a networking event or a question and answer part of the podcast, or maybe flyers that need to be put up on different of our websites. But parents need to know what their options are, because they're really trusting that they're working in the best interest of their child. But they really gotta understand you, the parent, are the best interest of your child, period. Period.
I understand the system, sound like to me.
Yes,
You
yes,
need to understand the system.
yes, they need to understand the system.
Can you write a manual on
I
that
need to.
system? I'll sponsor you.
Okay,
And we'll get rich. We'll
okay,
go,
deal.
we go book tour. City to city.
Because in the black
City
community,
to
they
city.
see that a lot.
The school system may not like it, but the people
The
will like
parents
it.
will.
Yeah,
We
right.
see that a lot
Deal.
that we put our
I'm
kids.
telling you, we need a book. Everyone needs a manual. You know, I call the Bible the book of life. It's a manual of how to live life to the fullest. Joy in the journey. That's what we're here about. And in respect to that, there are little books that we must have to help us navigate through the necessities of life.
Right.
And that's where good writers or people that have these ideas that understands what most people don't understand, and we need these outlets or this resource to be able to reference. We have to have it. You know, it's important.
Go ahead, Lisa, get your point. Schools.
Okay, well, as I saw it raising my children in the black community, then I took them out, but I took them to another community, which was the black community, just a higher level black community. Elite. African American community.
Yes.
They still would label the kids and put them in certain classes, and they would tell the parents that I'm trying to help your child. I'm trying to help them get to a certain point, but that child would never get there because they really were not trying to help. So I'm going along with Larry. We need to do something because we're losing our kids faster than we ever have before. We are losing
You know,
our children.
I heard this woman, this younger woman say, she said, we need to decolonize our activism. A lot of times we build our own schools, but we keep the same system that's oppressing us in our own schools.
Right.
That's true.
Right.
So I agree, and I take you on that challenge, because you talked about a checklist, you're talking about a book, like, there needs to be a little manual that they know what to look at.
Something to get.
So do you recommend that they go, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
It really needs to talk to people about their children. I'm glad you're here, and I have grandchildren, and I've raised two different kids, different in knowledge and everything, but they both are becoming successful, which is good because as they mature, the choices they make, and I always told them the choices you make affect the rest of your life. So they would always think before they did something, but we have all outside influences in our community, especially in the poor neighborhoods. But in the poor neighborhoods, I see that a lot of children, because of their parents not knowing what to do, then they get the diploma, whether it's a certificate, diploma, and they don't know what to do. They just stay, I don't know, I don't think I'm good enough to go to college.
I hear you talking about transition, right? Those transition services, which are usually reserved for students with severe and profound disabilities, but I'm realizing that whole gap between high school, what they call a gap year, I think, from high school to college years or training, there needs to be a pathway for our students. There's got to be, because we're losing them.
And when we were in school, I grew up in Sunnyside, there was, because there was different opportunities to say, if you cannot go to college, then you can work on cars. You can do some type of, they need to put that back in the school, to where you can be a mechanic, or you can be even welding back then, or you can.
They call that trade school.
Are you
Trade
saying
school.
that HISD doesn't have that anymore? Because Klein
Colleges
and
certainly
Spring,
don't
they have it.
HISD does not have
They
it.
don't have it.
And
A lot
also
of-
the
well, they
college.
have magnet
They
schools.
Yeah,
They have magnet schools where those kids can go to, but the regular school, they don't have it. That I
We have a
know. Now they
gentleman
might.
in the Acres Home area, the Acres, previous past president of Acres Home Chamber, Thomas Melanson, advocates the colleges and the community colleges to reinstill trade educated programs, because we've gotten so far away from it, because we've gotten into such a technology we lost our middle class society, you know, and we know who's unfortunately has replaced it with the dude off the train now. We don't have it, so now we either have or we have not.